Tensor is a commonly used term in the field of machine learning, deep learning, or AI, and it is very important to have at least a basic understanding on this topic. Within this lecture, we are going to cover tensors of different dimensions, and the agenda is to have a generalized idea on different type of tensors. So let's get started with this simple definition here that says tensor is a generalized term for a vector or matrix for any given number of dimensions. To elaborate this further, we have this table where we have the details for tensors of different dimensions. For example, we have this tensor of 0 dimension, which is called a scalar. A 1 dimension tensor is called a vector. Similarly, a 2 dimension tensor is called a matrix, and so on. Before we move any further, I understand that a lot of you may not have a prior knowledge of topics like vector or matrix. So let me tell you that within this playlist only, we are going to have a dedicated lecture for topics like vector and matrix that will help you to gain a fundamental understanding on these topics. And within this particular lecture, we will focus only on having a basic understanding for different types of tensors. So I will move ahead and I will try to give you a breakdown for all these types of tensors. And let's start first with scalar. So basically, scalar is a 0 dimension tensor that will contain only a magnitude, nothing else. So values like 5, 10 or 20, this type of values you will see as a scalar value. For example, 10 kilometers could be considered a scalar value because this does not have any information that towards which direction we are having a progress of 10 kilometers. It just has a magnitude, nothing else. Similarly, for 50 meters, we have a magnitude, but we have no idea that towards which direction we are talking about this progress. Moving on, a 1 dimension tensor is called a vector, and a vector can contain n number of elements. For example, this vector has 2 elements and this vector has 3 elements. In the field of programming, a vector is also called as an array, and let's try to have a breakdown for this vector with 2 elements here. So we have a magnitude of 20. So let's say we have 20 meters or maybe 20 kilometers, and the next value x can be considered as a direction. So we have an information that towards a certain direction we have a progress of 20 meters. And this is all about vectors. Let's move ahead to a tensor of 2 dimension, which is also called a matrix. For demo purpose, I have considered a matrix of 2 by 2 size. But this size could be anything. It could be 3 by 2, it could be 4 by 5. But just to keep it simple, within this lecture, I am considering a 2 by 2 size of matrix. And let's try to understand what information we can get from this 2 by 2 size of matrix. So a 2 dimension tensor can be used to locate a point on a 2-dimensional plane. So you can consider this figure as a surface or a mat on the floor. And let's say that we want to locate this point with the help of a matrix, and if you pay attention, then it is 4 points towards the x-axis, 0 points towards y-axis, and again 2 points towards y-axis and 0 points towards x-axis. And this is why we have these 4 elements within this matrix: 4, 0, 0, 2. And this is how this 2-dimension tensor is helping us to point out a location in a 2-dimensional plane. And the way a 2-dimension tensor helps us to locate a point on a 2-dimensional surface, similarly a 3-dimensional tensor, which also looks like a cube or maybe a dice, helps us to locate a point on a 3-dimensional space. So let's say we want to locate for this point. So this point will have a distance or a magnitude towards x direction. This will also have a magnitude towards y direction, and since it also has a height, so we will add one more dimension, which is z. And just to simplify, a 3D tensor helps us to point in a 3D space. Okay, so far we have understood about a 0 dimension tensor, which is a scalar that basically contains only a magnitude, a 1 dimension tensor, which is called a vector, also known as an array in the field of programming language. A 2-dimension tensor is a matrix that helps us to locate a point on a 2-dimensional flat surface. A 3-dimension tensor is called a 3D tensor, and its example could be a cube or dice. And the number of dimensions could go up to n. However, it is almost impossible to humanly visualize a tensor of above 3 dimensions, but it is not at all a problem with computers. Computers are very good at handling or doing calculations with higher dimension of tensors. Okay, so that is all for today's lecture. I hope you got to know something new within this video. Please consider supporting the channel by dropping a like below, and also subscribe to the channel if not yet subscribed, and I will see you in the next lecture.